So I'll just go into medias res now after the introduction by Susanne and Jörg. What I will present, some of you have partly heard because it's based on the workshops we did in the summer this year. It's on living together, metamorphoses of religious coexistence in Indian urban contexts. In the following address a question that is central to the KFG project. How do people live together in dense urban spaces? I will do so, as the title says, with a special focus on contemporary India. Let me start with some conceptual questions. What exactly does living together mean? Does this mean togetherness of people, that is an emphatic sense of living together, the sense of miteinander? Or does this just refer to the ways people in a city coexist with each other? In the last case, living together would be little more than an economical, functional, and/or political relationship. In such case, status criteria and hierarchies between sections of people receive a pivotal role. We might also think of combinations of both, certain sections of the populace sharing particular city spaces, while at the same time distancing themselves from other sections of the populace. Or conversely, feeling rejected and kept at arm's length by more powerful sections of the populace. The extreme are attempts to evict and oust particular groups from certain areas or from a city altogether and destroy their homes. Both religion and urbanity are currently being targeted in disastrous and tragic ways in a number of places in India. Especially Muslim residents have over and again been persecuted. Religion here is then not just a field affected by other forces, but increasingly also a field that develops specific dynamics and exerts pressures on other fields, and this way too on urban life and urban arrangements. It is important then to distinguish between the different notions and levels of the religious in each context. Religion appearing as identity in the form of collective religious rituals or in the form of beliefs and worship practices of individuals. The first mentioned form, religion as identity, means, and this is important, that religion cannot be separated from politics and the political. We discussed the ways people live together and their religious dimensions within the context of urban changes in and to cities, and changes to the ways cities are being lived. Urban settings, characterized by high social, ethnic, and religious diversity, have a particular potential for change. At the same time, account has to be taken of the wider social and political forces impacting on both religion and urbanity. While dealing with changes, ruptures, and discontinuities, we cannot overlook continuities. Continuities often concern divisions within society which have a long history, long existing cracks of the urban fabric. What I have particularly in mind are continuations of social fissures of the urban fabric that get articulated in form of class, caste, and denominational affiliations, or, an important distinction, in the form of attribution of a place in the social hierarchy. The other major continuity in the Indian context is that of religious diversity. Diversity of lifestyles outside and within cities, and diversity of religious practices and affiliations, as mentioned, has always been a major characteristic of India. Besides Southeast Asia, India has probably been the religiously most diverse and pluralist world region. Often people participate in several religious strands. Even if certain strands can get amalgamated or get subsumed under other strands, diversity not only continues, but develops new manifestations. Conversely, denominational affiliations can also harden into rigid boundaries. Separation, segregation, and contestation hinge on diversity. Continuation includes alterations. Alterations can affect the main threads of the social fabric and the lines of division. But the changes discussed here can be regarded as operating within the confines of a set and rigidly partitioned urban fabric. The combination of discontinuity with continuity represent what we catch by the metaphor of metamorphoses. It is about transformations that may sometimes be profound, but that are not comprehensive. that often go along with continuity of the core problematics, or problematique in French, which characterize a society. The urban sites in India are transforming with unbelievable speed. Many parts of Indian cities changing their faces considerably within just a couple of years. Smriti Srinivas captures this by the term urban sprawl. Accelerating urbanization can be detected across all city categories. In the larger cities and metropolitan areas, new suburbs arise at great pace, together with new business districts and cyber cities. At the same time, new slums are coming up in increasing numbers and existing slums grow. This is not just linear growth, however. For a view on new forms of urban religiosity, the process of a snowballing makeover of especially middle-class suburbs is of equal importance. The shift from relatively spacey and somewhat green accommodation in individual houses towards accommodation in luxury and incredibly expensive high-rises. Middle class is the key social category in this whole process. The often referred to switch of India to neoliberal policies, and thus the contemporary mode of globalization in 1991, can still be regarded as a landmark event, signifying a turn towards sweeping commercialization, new consumerism, and intensified global connectivities. This gets reflected in the development of a new middle class. The very category of middle class is fundamentally fuzzy. What new middle class is meant to point to, besides new categories of jobs, are a certain disposable income, a new lifestyle based on conspicuous consumption, and an enjoyment of distinction. Authors writing on the new Indian middle classes point towards a sense of both high aspiration and achievement, as well as efficiency, a wish to secure what one considers one's entitlement, but also, in many cases, a feeling of precarity. It has been argued that what characterizes the new middle class is the idea of moral consumption, in which consumption of modern goods is combined with the consumption of spiritual goods, like religion and nationalism, which allows to return to tradition, quote unquote, and gives a sense of mastery over modernity. The distinction with respect to what now be the old middle classes is not that these represent completely different sections of the population. They rather represent a change of generation, a change of professions, and a change of connectivities, now global, and most of all a change in lifestyle, habitus, and the outlook on life. One often finds both, old and new, within the same families. What is even more important, there is a strong continuity of caste underlying the middle classes. Middle class continues to encompass large sections of those called higher castes. In addition, some sections of the mid-range castes are moving into the middle class ranks, and as are top layers among Dalits. The question then is not only who can afford a middle class lifestyle, who can get close to that status range, but also who is permitted into that world. Boundaries are loose on the one hand, access to the temples of consumerism, like meanwhile ubiquitous shopping malls, depends on one's appearance and one's budget. On the other hand, access to middle-class quarters, and especially to gated communities, is heavily controlled and regulated by the residents' associations. Dalits and increasingly Muslims are kept out in a large number of cases. There's obviously no space here to discuss details of earlier forms and mechanisms of diversity. What has changed are specific dimensions of the components that make up the plural world, as well as the modalities of the interrelations, and among these two, the modalities of separation. Earlier times have been characterized by ways of acceptance of difference, dialogue, reciprocal translation and participation, but also strife for prominence, competition, displacement, or attempts at inclusion of other traditions. Since the 19th century, in the colonial period, the demarcation of what came to be called religions, the idea of belonging to only one religion, and the demand to position one's religion in a global religious framework has increasingly shaped developments reaching a new level today. Painting again with a broad brush, I would like to allude to three wider-ranging concurrent developments that together change the terms of plurality while pointing in different directions. Firstly, the globalization of earlier Hindu traditions, propelled by migration and the new Indian diasporas, a process that feeds back into the home country. Secondly, the development of new Hinduist or Hindu-syncretist religious traditions, often labeled guru movements, radiating globally. Thirdly, the mounting attempts at mainstreaming and nationalizing Hinduism in association with the rising repression of particularly Muslims and Islam. Religious distinctions become sharper, or better, sharp distinctions are now being accentuated with increasing force. To concentrate for a moment on the third trend, I see two different but combined ideas of plurality here, which appear as two sides of the same coin. An inclusivist plurality vis-à-vis an exclusionary and aggressive one. On the one hand, plurality outside the more and more circumscribed Hindu fold. That is, the existence of alternative religious forms and traditions is being less and less accepted by spokespersons of this form of Hinduism. On the other hand, the attempt at enshrining religious plurality within, and thus confined to, the wider Hindu frame. This is achieved by softening or downplaying distinctions, disparities, and tensions between the various Hinduist religious and philosophical strands, between Brahmanism and anti-Brahmanism, replacing the earlier attempts at Semitizing Hinduism, at remaking Hinduism on the model of the Semitic or Abrahamic religions. The attempt now rather seems to be to make the disparities within the Hindu fold appear as just shades of a shared tradition, and to incorporate other Indic traditions, including Ambedkarite Buddhism. The mainstreaming agenda is reflected also in the new push for a generalized vegetarian lifestyle. The notions about plurality among the lower castes are partly different and are only partly given an explicit ideological frame. There is a continuity of preference given to religious options that universalistically conceive of all humans as inherently and spiritually equal. At the same time, divisive attitudes have crept in here too. And many urban poor share anti-Muslim feelings, which allow for them being employed as perpetrators in anti-Muslim pogroms. The developmental trends mentioned contribute to reshaping the urban religious landscape of Indian cities. They strengthen new versions of Hinduist practices which are not neighborhood-centered, while remaining class and caste-centered, are media-savvy, attract members of the globally active and globally linked new Indian middle classes, or offer new hubs of globalizing Hinduism for a wider middle-class population. They also represent a strong trend towards monumentalization of temple structures. On the level of everyday religious practice, it is the multiplying individual temples and shrines, partly embedded in local or regional networks, that receive massive investments and are being upgraded and expanded. The discussion of segregation has to be placed within this pluralistic landscape as its other side. Segregation reaches from simple separation and distinction to outright discrimination of sections of the population. Segregation is physically mirrored in the urban topographies as it is socially mirrored in the differences of life worlds and lifestyles. Quarters and suburbs of the different sections of people are often clearly demarcated. Architecturally, this is mirrored in the increased gating of buildings or entire middle-class areas. The flip side of this is the assignation of other city sectors as polluted or polluting and stigmatized. The continuation of social discrimination based on pollution stigmatization, economic marginalization, and religio-political ostracization leads to the concentration of low castes and Muslims in disadvantaged quarters characterized by extremely high population densities. In many cases, in middle class as well as in urban poor areas, one finds further segregation along caste, denominational and linguistic lines. Urbanity then finds different articulations in modern urban Indian contexts. Urbanity relates to the everyday practices within the neighborhoods and suburbs, each social category having a different sense of the urban. Secondly, specific forms of at least metropolitan urbanity connect to business and work life and to the daily commute between home and workplaces. Thirdly, middle-class urbanity in particular finds exemplary articulation in the spaces of recreation, from eateries to clubs and malls, and to pleasure park pilgrimage centers. But fourthly also, the today ever-present connection to both family and business partners abroad in the global hubs has been informing local urbanity. Urban life in India today is very much interlinked with urban places elsewhere, upholding social separation. Religion is part and parcel of these different urbanities. Religion complements urban life in India rather than being seen as compensation for suffering and the adversaries of life. Limited, compared to earlier periods, is the extent to which religious ideas and practices are used to articulate social critique. What has been pointed out, set against the background of the new urban Hindu middle class, is the new affluence of many temples and the remarkable and visible growth in ritual acts, like Tulsi Srinivas calls it, including a sometimes excessive display of wealth. These rituals, in Srinivas's view, express resistance to the tedium of the modern, as well as a provision of hope and the possibility of an alternate reality, a better future of joy and care. One might identify in urban religious practices a search for new roots or for a fresh grounding in a new environment. This may be connected with the need of coming to terms with globalization, the experience of the difficult to handle extension of one's action radius into various challenging, culturally different world regions. What we then find in contemporary Indian cities are largely segregated strands of urbanity and of religiosity of different spread and extension. Most religious strands are shared by members of similar class and caste backgrounds. These strands link to urban space in very different ways. How people live together in the dense urban space of Indian cities are mixes of long-distance relations and close affinity, of localization and universalization, of closeness, civil watchful indifference, and of disconnection, and of a revocation of belonging. Thank you.